What is IUL? Indexed Universal Life. What does it mean to max fund an IUL? In this episode, you will understand what IUL is and what it means to max fund an IUL policy. And by the end of this video, you will understand why a properly structured and maximum funded IUL is designed to accumulate your money tax-free. And then it allows you to access your money totally income tax-free. And when you ultimately die, whatever is left behind blossoms, increases in value, and transfers income tax-free. So get ready. So I'm Doug Andrew. I've been a financial strategist now for 48 years and helping people prepare for long-term goals like a comfortable retirement. And one of my favorite vehicles, bar none, is a max-funded IUL policy. I've owned several throughout my lifetime. My children own them. As I explain in other episodes, I think it's the dream solution for many financial goals, especially long-term goals like retirement. So let's just talk about what is an IUL policy and what does it mean to max fund it? So I'm going to explain that it began clear back in 1980. Okay, now I started in 1974 and I had over 3,000 clients that I was responsible for in 13 Western states by the year 1980. And clear back then, I was helping a lot of people with a product to be able to insure them with life insurance, term insurance, and then we would have them invest the difference. But the biggest problem, a lot of people won't invest the difference unless they're disciplined to do so. And so we would have 2/3 of their money automatically go into a portfolio of mutual funds. The problem was that even if we could earn 12% in the mutual funds, after paying tax, sooner or later on an IRA or 401k, they weren't netting 12, they were only netting 8. But Dalbar, who studies investor behavior, says most people only really earn about 3.5% if they have their money in the market. That's pretty pathetic. Even if you bought and held like Warren Buffett says, you would only earn 9.14% average on any 20-year period based upon American history since the Great Depression. If you earn 9% before tax, you're only netting 6% after tax. Well, back in 1980, E.F. Hutton, who was not an insurance company, they were the brainchild behind the emergence of universal life. It wasn't term, it wasn't whole life, it was designed for living benefits. And so what E.F. Hutton realized back then is that for decades in the Internal Revenue Code, money inside of a life insurance policy or contract accumulates tax-free under Section 72E of the Internal Revenue Code. All interest, dividends, or whatever are tax-free. When you access money while you're still alive out of that insurance policy, it can be totally income tax-free. It doesn't trigger tax, like if you dipped into an IRA or 401k, if you adhere to Section 7702. So 72E, it accumulates tax-free. 7702, you can access the money income tax-free. And then at the end of the day, when you pass away, the cash values increase or blossom and they transfer income tax-free under Section 101A. These three sections of the code, in one form or another, have been around now for more than 108 years. So when we talk about what an IUL is, that was universal life back in 1980. Interest rates were high. In fact, from 1980 to 1990, I never got credited less than 11.75% on my universal life policies. But I got credited as high as 15.5%. So interest rates were high, 11.75 up to 15.5%. But then in the 90s, interest rates started to come down. So in 1997, they introduced indexed universal life. And I remember the company, ING, was the first one to introduce it. And it allowed policyholders to be able to earn higher rates of return without the risk of losing money when the market went down. But when the market went up, you got to participate. So in this series, you will learn, if you watch other episodes, how indexing works. But that's what IUL is indexed universal life, because you can tell the insurance company, don't put my money at risk, but I think America is going to be, going up. You feel bullish about America. So you can link your returns to an index or indices, and they might be the S&P or the Dow Jones or the Russell 2000, or you can diversify. But be sure and watch those episodes, because your money is not invested in the market. It stays safe in the insurance company. It is earning the general account portfolio rate. You're just relinquishing the interest that they're earning on your money that year to be able to purchase options. If the market goes up, then they can pay you a higher rate of return. And if the market crashes, you just relinquish the interest, but you did not lose one dime of your principal. Be sure and watch those episodes. And by the way, post a comment or share this with other people that may be interested in understanding and getting educated. So when we talk about these three sections of the code, they've been around for over a century. All E.F. Hutton realizes, why don't we structure an insurance policy instead of trying to pay the least amount of premium into the policy for the death benefit we wanted? Let's flip the objective and use it for living benefits. What that means is, let's take the least amount of insurance the IRS will let us get away with, and let's put in the most premium that the IRS allows, or the amount that you really want to sock away and accumulate for your life to use in retirement. Does that make sense? So this allows us to do it on a tax-free basis. Now, back in 1980, when they introduced this, golly, I said, this is it. This is like buy term, invest the difference on steroids, because it's tax-free. And so we had a massive exodus of money that began to leave the banks, the brokerage firms, and so forth into these, because they're safer, they pay higher interest, and they're tax-free. And banks and credit unions and brokerage firms could not compete with that. And so what happened is, the IRS came in and said, what are you doing? E.F. Hutton wasn't doing anything wrong. They went to court and E.F. Hutton won. But then the IRS went to Congress and said, we've got to change the definition of tax-free under these three sections of the code. And if you violate those definitions, it's going to go over to a different section of the Internal Revenue Code. It's going to be taxable. And usually if it's in an investment, they call it an investment, then it will be subject to volatility. No, we want to get rid of market volatility. We don't want it to be taxed sooner or later. And so we want to keep it protected under these three sections of the code. So in 1982, under the Tax Equity Fiscal Responsibility Act, and then 2 years later, because they didn't know what they were doing, it wasn't clear enough, Congress passed under the Deficit Reduction Act, and these spell acronyms, TEFRA and DEFRA. And you can learn about these in my book, but simply put, TEFRA and DEFRA simply dictate the minimum amount of insurance that the IRS requires that you have to have in order to sock away your money and not violate these sections of tax-free accumulation, access, and transfer, based upon your age, your gender, and your health. But they gave parity. So what's so beautiful about this, it didn't matter if you're a 22-year-old athletic marathon running female, or if you're a 60-year-old or a 79-year-old, you could get the same rate of return on your IUL policy, whether you were 80 or whether you were 20. Why? Because even though the cost of insurance goes up as you get older, the amount of insurance becomes less every month you get older if you structure this correctly. So you will see in other episodes that this can actually get cheaper as you age, as you get older. Because what you're doing is you're accumulating the money tax-free, and if you earn in 1 year 11%, you can net 10. That 1% differential is the cost of the insurance, but it will be 1% when it's done right on the average, whether you're 60 or 79 years old or 20 years old. The amount of insurance required is less the older you get. And you will understand this when you begin to see illustrations based upon your age and situation. Even if you're not healthy, you can squeeze down the death benefit even lower. So don't rule yourself out. So that's what a max funded policy can do for you. And then a few years later, this was in 1988, under the Technical and Miscellaneous Revenue Act, they wanted to slow the flow. The banks and brokerage firms couldn't compete. They said, we don't want to ruin these. Why? Because this is where a lot of banks and credit unions and brokerage firms put some of their money. They don't want to bugger up this tax-free accumulation, but they wanted to slow the flow so that if somebody had a lump sum of money, they wouldn't take it all out at once out of the bank or the brokerage firm and put it into one of these, which they were doing. People were doing that. I had people put in 500 grand in one fell swoop, and they started pulling out 10% or 50,000 a year instantly, tax-free. They've been doing it ever since because they're grandfathered. But see, Tamara said, oh, if somebody wants to put in a lump sum like $500,000 or $50,000, whatever, you can only put in about 20% a year, especially if you're over age 50. So if you wanted to put in 500,000, you could only put in about 100,000 a year. And I explained that in other episodes, but that's Tamara. And so these have to do with the amount of insurance that's required, and Tamara has to do with how fast you can put the money in there. So when we use an indexed universal life, it also means that the money in the insurance company is safe, earning what is called their general account portfolio rate. That might be, only 3 or 4%, but if you want to earn higher than that because you think the economy is going to do well, this is what you can do. I compared this to like a bucket. Let's say this bucket is a repository, an IUL policy. And so what you're doing is designing it to accommodate the amount of cash contributions you want to make into the bucket. And then the Tefra and Tamara tax citations talk about the minimum death benefit that's required down here. This is Tefra and Tamara. So if this were a 60-year-old male, for example, that wanted to be able to put in $100,000 over the next 5 years or 20 years into the IUL policy, the minimum death benefit under Tefra would be $250,000. For a younger person, it would be way more than that, maybe $1 million. But the cost of $1 million for a 20-year-old is no more than for a 60-year-old. But see, the cost of the insurance, which is the spigot on the bucket, is actually watering a nice little money tree that's going to blossom at the end of the day. See, if you put in a full 100 and you die, it blossoms to 250, tax-free. And so at the end of the day, it's actually not costing, it's making you money. But that 1% difference, if I earn 11 and I net 10, if I earn 8 and I net 7, that 1% is money that would otherwise go out the window in maybe unnecessary income tax if I followed the herd and put my money in IRAs and 401ks. Does that make sense? So it's like it doesn't cost me anything. Nothing's free, but it doesn't cost me anything because that 1% would be paid out in unnecessary tax or whatever, and I'm going to recoup it at the end of the day. So let's say you put in 100,000. Tamara said, well, you can only fill up maybe 20,000 a year. And now everything that you pull out of here, thereafter your grandfather is tax-free. That's what Tamara says. If you put in the whole 100,000 in one fell swoop, it'll grow tax deferred. But if you go to access the money, now the income will be taxable LIFO, last in, first out. You don't want that if you're going to use it for living benefits. But it doesn't matter if you die, the death benefit is always income tax free. That's the beauty behind this. But when we talk about indexed universal life, if you were 60 and you wanted to put in 500,000, the minimum death benefit would be $1,250,000. That is dictated under Tefra, and then Tamara says, oh, I can only put in 100,000 a year in order to comply with Tamara, and now everything. This bucket could grow. We've had people put in 500,000, it doubles to $1 million in 7.5 years at 9.6% average return. And that million doubles to 2 million in another 7.5 years. And that 2 million doubles to 4 million in another 7.5 years. And lo and behold, in the 30th year, this 500,000 is now worth $8 million. And that is generating 800,000 a year of tax-free income without depleting principals for as long as they live. That's the beauty behind indexing. So when you meet with an IUL professional, there will be terms that they may use, and they'll explain what they mean, like GSP is guideline single premium. That's the amount of money you want to put into the policy or the bucket. Guideline level premium is the amount that you could put in on an annual basis without ever being stopped by the IRS. The guideline annual premium, okay, is basically synonymous. It means the same thing. TAMRA means that's as much as you can put in and still preserve tax-free access. And then you can use a level death benefit, or you can use an increasing death benefit option, and they'll show you how you may want to flip between those two options. And for living benefits, you want to solve for the least amount of insurance you can get away with, and you want to accommodate most of the assets you want to reposition. And so it's sort of like a 5-story apartment building. If you build a 5-story building and the IRS said, hey, if you will only lease out the first floor the first year, and then you can lease out another floor the second year, and then third year, fourth year, and finally in the 5th year. Even the first day of the 5th year, which would actually be 4 years and 1 day after you started, now you can lease out the rest of the building. We will allow all of the rental income to be tax-free the rest of your life. I would do that. That's what you're doing by complying with TAMRA in an IUL policy. So I would recommend, again, you study and understand how this works. This book, The Laser Fund, over 300 pages, charts, graphs, explanations, and 62 chicken soup for the financial soul stories. And so you can go to laserfund.com and claim your free copy. If you don't have it yet, you contribute a nominal amount towards the shipping and handling, and I'll cover the rest of that cost. But this is to your brighter future.